Welcome to the Tarot Tapestry, a weaving of self-discovery, where three tarot mavens put their heads and hearts together to offer their wisdom and insights about the tarot. We hope that you find this helpful in your personal journey to self-discovery and growth.
Join us as we explore ways to use tarot for self-reflection and self-correction.
Together, we'll discover new ways to use tarot to weave threads of understanding into the tapestry of your life. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Tarot Tapestry. And today I am joined by Linda, and we will be discussing the Queens. And I'm pretty excited about this episode. Prior to us recording, Linda and I had such a fabulous conversation, and we were basically talking about masculine energy, feminine energy, or masculine principles, feminine principles, and we got into a really great conversation about that. And I think it kind of started because I was telling Linda that I was looking at the queens, more like the queens and the kings, as two parts to a whole. You know, the queens being a very embodying like feminine principles of like a deep connection to your intuition, just this idea of connectedness to like nature or relationships and people, and just being in a flow with life, you know, and being that like a feminine principle or energy can be related to water. It's just this idea of like helping things flow smoothly in your life, you know. And then the kings were more of that masculine part, right? The part about action. We got to take action. There needs to be structure. It's this linear thinking, you know. And in life, we need both of those energies to work in unison in order for us to be balanced, right? And I think so much of us in life are learning how to balance ourselves in life, and how being in balance helps us to just make more effective choices, you know, just being able to do things, um, you know, and to do things better, more effective, um, and then also to even help us kind of reduce our stress level, right? To help us feel a bit more calmer and at ease as we're walking, you know, this path in life. So that was kind of my take on them. And I think when I talk about the queens a little bit later, that's going to be more of my focus on that, incorporating that feminine principle or that feminine energy, like yin energy, in my descriptions. Linda, what about you?
Well, interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, I have a little bit of a hard time with that, as we talked about, and I'm hoping we'll be able to cut some of that conversation into this in a logical way, because it was a really good discussion. But I feel like, and I agree with you, when you look at them as archetypes, the king and the kings and the queens, and then you put them together as a complete person, that works really well. I think that's an interesting way to look at it, and I think it makes sense. Um, I guess just out of my own persona, my own person and upbringing and everything that I have kind of gone through, is that I have a really hard time with the whole concept of not not so much feminine energy per se, but as a person who grew up in the early 60s. I was born in 1957, so I kind of came to cognizance in the early 60s, pre-school segregation, pre all this stuff, pre girls being able to wear pants to school, pre all of that, and being not feminine by description, always being too tall, too large, too smart, too whatever, that it it always bothered me that I was told that I had to be smaller, weaker, dumber, and cry if I wanted to get anything. And that's how femininity, not being female, but they're two different things. But that's how femininity felt to me, was that in order to be, if I was going to be feminine, I had to be less than what I was.
I'm
And
so happy that you're sharing that feeling because I think a lot of our listeners and women out there feel the same way. And I did for a long time too. And I think my thoughts about that changed as I started to use tarot and as I started to do more research, and just kind of read how different um, tarot artists and tarot readers interpreted the cards, and how there was, and there still is like this movement to kind of debunk. And I was mentioning this earlier before we recorded this idea of debunking that feminine energy is the same as being a female and understanding that being feminine doesn't mean you're weaker, right? It doesn't mean that you are less than, but we have come to that understanding or that belief because we lived and still do in a very male dominated society, and that was what we were taught over and over again through words, through actions, through behaviors, that's what we were. And in essence, it's really not that. So I'm really hoping that we can help people to kind of open their minds a little bit and
yeah,
maybe redefine what maybe feminine energy or that feminine principle is and a masculine principle, because it's still new to me and I'm still navigating it, but it makes me feel better to know that if a male embraces feminine energy, that to me is a beautiful thing because that person is now able to recognize and understand that our emotions, being compassion, being empathetic. And there are lots of people, males out there that are, and that to me is part of feminine energy.
well,
And there's
that's just it.
nothing
It's
wrong
like
with it.
there are plenty of men in the world who will listen to you, who will listen
Yes.
to people in their lives, who teach their children how to do things in a compatible way,
Kind.
or a
Yes.
compassionate way, versus just say,
Hmm.
learn how to do this or I'm going to beat you, that kind of thing. There's a ton of, and it's just like it's being a complete person. A complete person can act when they need to act, and then they can
Yes.
listen when they need to listen. They can take orders, they can give orders, they can organize things, they can sit back and let others do things when they don't have the experience or the knowledge to do it, and be okay with that because I don't know everything. So I'm going to let this person do it because they know what they're doing. They can be complete people. We all need to be complete people. We have so many facets to ourselves that it's just silly to say, oh, well, he's a man and he's only going to go out and hunt food or whatever, and she's a woman and she's only going to go to the stream and wash clothes. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Everybody has
Yes.
skills and talents that are described as the other gender or the other thing, and we all contain those things within ourselves. So it doesn't make any sense to try to put everything in a box and just say, oh no, I'm not going to do that, because it's not feminine.
I know. And you said that so beautifully. I think you really just kind of like put that all into a nice package with a beautiful little bow. I think that was beautiful because, yes, we all do. And I even notice now, like in the younger generation, like my son's age, maybe a little bit older and a little bit younger, everybody. Both male, female, whatever gender you identify with, people are starting to realize and understand that embracing your emotions, your feelings, learning to regulate them, learning to understand them, learning to identify them, right? Like we did a whole episode on like emotional regulation with
Right.
tarot, and that is all part of it. It is just embodying and embracing another part of us that is so necessary in our daily life. If the more that we can become in tune with our inner selves, right? Our intuition, our emotions, our feelings, the more that we can get in tune with that, the I personally feel the happier we can be in life and the more power we give ourselves to help us deal with the overabundance of challenges
Hmm.
and obstacles and just crap that is going on in the world, and
Right.
being able to do so without having nervous breakdowns all the time. Because I can tell you, I've had many of a panic attacks. I've had many like where I was just, woof, I'm done. I can't do any more of this. And that was more because I didn't have any skills, any strategies to help me do that, and yeah, so I don't want to like get
Yeah.
off way off topic there, but
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to mention just before we go on with the actual queens is that, I've kind of been on this anti-racism journey for a while. And one of the things that people talk about in that journey is like white women's tears.
Mhm.
Now, if somebody say, there's a confrontation between a black woman and a white woman in a business setting, and the black woman like stands up for herself, then the white woman dissolves into tears, then all focus goes on to her. And what did you do to make this poor woman cry? That kind of thing. Well, I witnessed that and experienced that way before anti-racism or anything, in that you get into an argument with a mean girl, little blonde girl, and you're the bucktooth cat glass wearing girl that's bigger than she is. And what happens? She dissolves into tears, and everybody's like, "Oh, why did you make Betsy cry with her pretty little blonde curls and everything like that? What's wrong with you, you big lug?" You know, so I know how that feels from the other side. And it's like, that's one of the reasons that I am just so anti-racist, because it's so wrong. And I'll stop right there, but it's just like, it relates over to that. And so there's things that happen, or things that you deal with that you think are not related to a certain subject, and then as you get more experience and you think, oh, I experienced that myself in a
Yeah,
different context, but I know what it feels like. you know
yeah,
I know what it feels like, because I can't change that I'm tall, and I can't change that, I wear glasses, and I can't change that I'm bigger than this girl is, and she's acting like, I was mean to her, and I just was living. Yeah.
yeah, I get you, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can relate to that, me included,
Yeah.
So yeah.
So which
So do
queen do
you
we,
want,
I
yeah,
was
oh, go
gonna say,
ahead.
which queen do we want to start with?
I have the Queen of Pentacles. I'm looking at my notes about her right
Okay,
here. So why don't we go with
let's do
the
it.
Queen of Pentacles? So I truly love it. So I just want to let our listeners know that I read I'm using the Light Seers Tarot by Chris Ann, and I have her tarot guidebook, and I did a lot of reading, like with her book. And a lot of what I'm going to say will either be directly from her guidebook or just more paraphrased, because I really, really resonated with everything that she said about the queens, and it was very in sync with my understanding of it. I just wanted to put that out there. So for the Queen of Pentacles, I find the Queen of Pentacles to be a very grounded energy, right? That just very in tune with my surroundings, what's going on around me, what can I do to make the spaces that I live in comfortable for myself, for my family, for my friends, right? This idea of living your values, understanding your values regarding your family, your work, your home, right? Like I mentioned before, I heard somebody refer to it as like sacred spaces, like this idea of being able to cultivate a sacred space that's going to make you feel basically good, right? Welcomed or calm or at ease when you go there, and this ability to express their emotions in a way that expresses in a way that actually gets your message across without um, in a maybe a more calm way, in a way that's more effective. I know I'm going to be using this word effective a lot. And then it's, like just and other type of earthly things, like just the clothes that you wear are comfortable for you, right? You're living this life of comfort that is important to you. It's what you value in life. And I know some people also refer to her to the Queen of Pentacles as, the working mom, right? Like being able to do that juggling between work and family and taking care of my children and finding that balance, between the two. So that was pretty much, and her ability, or the Queen of Pentacles, I keep saying her, the Queen of Pentacles, like ability to just find that balance, right? That balance in your world to make it just a bit easier for you to carry on with your day.
Yeah.
So that was more of like the more positive aspects, or in the Light Seer's Guide, she calls it the light um, descriptions of
Yeah.
the cards.
Yeah. I'm just with the cards. I'm just working with the regular classic Rider Waite deck, but I did do I did do a little bit of research and reading in the Thoth deck, which I've been working with this month, and also um, on a couple of videos by Benabel Wynn, who is just
Mm.
incredible person when it comes to tarot. And I know our Angie, who's not able to be here today, but she has the Spirit Keepers Tarot and does a lot of work with that. And one of the things that she talked about was where the queens are on the Tree of Life, which is Binah. The Tree of Life kind of
Hmm.
has this thing that's it's Binah, which corresponds to the threes. So the queens are kind of linked to the three cards in each suit, which is I thought was really interesting. And also how they're all to a certain extent connected with water. Their element, that's their element of the suit. So Pentacles would be earth, but also connected to water. And I thought it was really interesting because I think of, water and earth, I think of mud. But at the same
Hmm.
time, when you water the earth, it becomes very fertile and it grows things and it blooms. And you can't have that. If you don't have that water on the earth, things will wither and die. And the other thing that she talked about with the Queen of Pentacles is it's kind of like playing the cards that you're dealt.
Mm.
That you get this is what you have and this is what you're going to have to make do with. And the Queen of Pentacles is kind of a star at that. um, the other side of that, on the darker side, or the reversed maybe, is that it can kind of morph into a fear of losing things, or a fear of scarcity or lack. And then might kind of tilt over into hoarding, or just being afraid that stuff is going to be taken away from you, and so you become that um, kind of rigid and not giving, and not because you're afraid something's going to be taken. But that's the kind of the negative, the darker side of it. But for the most part, like you said, Kate, she's very much sort of not well, not so much the generator, but the person who has the resources and can distribute those resources in a fair manner and take care of her subjects, if you will, equally, so that she knows that this person might need this and this person might need this. And if you want to think it to mom, your kids, if you have more than one child, each child is different and they need different things. So it's kind of like that.
Yeah, I like that. And when you were talking about the more shadowy side of it, it could also be like an over focus of material things, right? That need to say, I need beautiful things around me because that is what is going to make me, feel better. Or this idea that I need it because society tells me that,
Yeah.
I need to have these beautiful things surrounding me. And that can be very, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be so shadowy, but when you take it to the extreme and now you're overspending because you
Right.
feel you
Or
need
the
to
whole
have
thing
all
of,
these things.
I've given you all these things. Why aren't you happy? Instead of like the
Hmm.
parent who gives buys everything for the kid, but doesn't spend any time with the kid, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, they have everything, but they have everything but your attention. And what they want is your attention and less stuff. So,
Yeah. And one other word I just wanted to mention about the Queen of Pentacles, and I think it's more of a the pentacle aspect of it, is just learning to be patient, right? Because we know throughout the whole Pentacles oh my God. I was telling Linda earlier, I'm just forgetting everything. All the words
suit,
are escaping. The suit, yes, thank you. You know, that suit is really just about patience, right? It's about being patient and almost like being patient to the point where maybe you're allowing the guidance to come to you through nature, through the things that are around you. And sometimes and that's how I see, actually, I see all of the queens that way. I see all of the queens exhibiting this sense of patience, but we can attribute that patience to the different suits and what each of those suits represents in them.
yeah.
Um, okay, so then the next one I had on there was the Queen of Wands. Is that okay? We go with that one?
Yeah, that's fine. Uh-huh.
Yeah. This was one of the queens that I wanted to like embrace more. I wanted to be the Queen of Wands because I've always felt I was the complete opposite. I was always the very shy girl. I was always like, I don't open my mouth. I don't say anything. People are not going to listen to me. They're not going to like what I have to say. You know, just like very like low confidence, low self-esteem, never really quite felt like my word meant much to other people. I didn't feel like I was smart enough. So I couldn't really express my voice because I didn't think that people would want to hear it. And then look at me now on a podcast where I'm doing this, and that's like huge for me, right? So I
Yeah.
look at the Queen of Wands as just being very confident in one's ability that and you have like a purpose. Like wands is very fiery, right? So it's about your passions and your desires, and it's really also about going after what you want, right? I have a like there's a purpose, or I have a passion, and this is what I want to do, and you go for it, and you go for it even though you may be scared, but you're going to do it anyway. And you're going to work really hard to overcome that so that you can accomplish what you want to do. And then on your journey for doing that, right, you're gaining all of this experience, but you're also encouraging and helping others while you're doing it, right? Like if you did say you had this thing and maybe you started like a little business or a little side hustle and you have people working for you, or you need to go out and like get customers and stuff. Like you just have this outgoing ability where you're like listening to what people are saying. You're able to connect to them, in a very social way. So you're very sociable, and you value other people's opinions, and that's kind of how I see it. And I have like my sister very much reminds me of the Queen of Wands. And I have a best friend of mine. We've been friends for like 39 years. I can't even believe it's been that long. And her too. Like they're different. They're very different people, but they both exhibit that Queens of Wands energy,
Yeah.
and I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was looking at, again, the what I had kind of my research in. The wands, of course, is the suit that corresponds with fire. And again, queens have also the watery aspect. And so when I think of fire and water, now you think that the water would put out the fire, but what it does is it makes steam. And steam is a power. I mean, you think steam engine, you think steam cleaning, stuff that you can really get done. And it is clean. Steam is clean. It's just heated up water. And so you can get a lot of stuff done. You don't have a lot of, a lot of byproducts that are going to mess up people. And I think, well, when I think of the Queen of Wands, I think of my mom. I mean, my mom was just like, she never met a stranger. She never backed down from anything in her life. she was sort of an eternal optimist. And if she ever had a down day, the whole family was like, oh my God, everything's going to collapse because mom doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It's like, holy moly, what do we do? We got to get her back on track, you know. So she was totally the Queen of Wands. And I think that, that kind of energy is so helpful because it moves you forward. And it's not that you can't acknowledge that you have negative feelings or down days. It's not like the toxic positivity that says, I'm not going to acknowledge that any of this bad stuff even exists. I'm not even going to look at it. It's just that the energy that you have from the impetus of this water, I think of the steam again, the impetus of this force behind you just kind of pushes you past it. It's like, okay, yeah, I acknowledge it. I'm not feeling great, but yet I still have to keep going because I've just got so much momentum. I can't let it stop me.
I like that. I think that's really nice because you can so maybe a shadowy part of that would be you're allowing all of those like emotions or maybe the fear or just being scared of doing something to actually stop you from
Right.
achieving, what you want to do. It's like self-sabotage, right? Like you can be shadowy side of it, right? Self-sabotage. Sabotage. Oh my God. And then the idea of like afraid to take risks. Like when I think of a Queen of Wands, I think of a person that is just like willing to take risks, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen unless you take the risk. And I know for myself to get me to take some risks takes quite a bit of time. And I really have to work very hard at moving past what will people think about me? Like
Yeah.
and even maybe that idea of perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
You just have to show the perfect you. Because I think some people might look at the Queen of Wands as that, right? Oh, that perfect person, she does everything right, she's sociable, she's this, she's that, she's just like, and that can be in like a detriment for you, right? This idea that I have to be perfect. So I think even allowing yourself to be somewhat vulnerable or just show that this is my authentic self,
Right.
and putting it out there because, we're all beautiful people. We just, others need to see that, So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I was again going back to my mom and the Queen of Wands here. I was raised by a woman whose motto literally was, "Who cares what the neighbors think?" It's like I
Yeah.
got stuff to do, and I mean, and she struggled. She struggled because um, by the time she had 4 kids and by the time I was aware of her as my mom, she had gained weight and she was fat and kind of short. And she struggled with that her whole life because my dad wasn't happy with it, even though he never said anything, but it was always kind of implied and you could definitely tell that. And then years later, when I was in my apartment with my grandson, I was going through a box of stuff that my brother had sent me, and I found this letter that my grandmother, my dad's mother, had written to her. Pages of typed
Oh.
things about her weight. And I'm just like, bitch,
Mm,
shut up, you know? And it's funny because we haven't gotten to the Queen of Swords yet. And I have a much better relationship with the Queen of Swords now. But there was one particular deck that I worked with for a long time, and the Queen of Swords was my least favorite card, and it made me think of my grandmother because she was
mm,
very kind of judgy. But anyway, back to the Queen of Wands. So it's not that the Queen of Wands is perfect or doesn't struggle. It's just that she's so dynamic because nobody I ever knew that knew my mother ever mentioned her weight. It was not a thing. It was her
yeah.
personality, it was her dynamics, it was her sense of humor, it was her whole aura that she gave off. And once you met her and started talking to her, the rest of it just didn't make any difference, you know? So
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. That's a
yeah.
beautiful example. Yeah, right there. All right, so that I was saving the Queen of Swords for last.
You can.
So maybe we can go on to the Queen of Cups,
Yep.
which I love the Queen of Cups. Um, and my biggest thing in describing the Queen of Cups is a person who listens to understand and validates your feelings. And I know that might sound like really crazy to come out of my mouth, but I just feel like we live in a world right now where both of those things are lacking. And it has a lot to do with our current political situation and like a divide that kind of that is going on in our country. But like the Queen of Cups is
World.
water and water, going back to what you were saying, Linda, right? It's water and water. And that is like full emotions, connected, relationships. It's all of that inner um that inner stuff, your intuition, your emotions, your all of that stuff. And I think that when I look at a person who embodies the Queen of Cups, I think of a person who just understands that in order to connect with another person, um, part of that connection needs to be at a deeper emotional level, right? Like that's the kind of person, and maybe even like a therapist, or like a counselor who is gonna be and acknowledge the like how a person feels and how those feelings direct your behavior. And I think that they have a bit more of an emotional intelligence than maybe the other queens. And I think all the queens, and just being that queen, we have that has like just a represents like a higher emotional intelligence. But when I think it comes to the Queen of Cups, it's a little bit more enhanced.
Yeah.
Maybe we allow that to shine. Listen, I'm not all that. The queens allow it to shine. Well, I am a queen. Shit. So are
We're
you,
all
Linda. We're
queens, honey.
both
We're all
queens.
queens.
It just lets it shine a little bit more. They're considered like to be the most deeply intuitive of all the queens. And the other thing that I wanted to mention that made me think about it is this is all also a lot of it comes from the guidebook. So I just want people to know that. I don't want anybody saying, oh my God, she said everything that's in the guidebook. No, I'm making it known that I read the guidebook and I took some things from the guidebook. Um, this idea of leading with your heart, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Heart Math Institute. Have you ever heard of them?
I have heard of heart. Well, I've heard of heart math. Yeah.
Yeah, so they work on basically they developed a system to help you better connect your heart with your mind. And the whole premise of that is to allow you to deeper your connection with your heart and balance, how the mind and the heart work together. And that's just a very simplified
Yeah.
version of that. And that reminds me of the Queen of Cups, having that ability to balance our mind and our heart in order to create an environment that maybe feels safe, that maybe brings more ease to a situation, that's validating of your feelings. um like does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
yeah.
And I wanted to go back to that what you had said about the water of water because that was one of my notes here, and also the fact that because of that, it's almost like water is an incredible conductor, as you know. I
Hmm.
don't want to be anywhere near water if there's a thunderstorm, because it
Yes.
conducts that current. And then if you have ever watched any submarine movies, which I'm a big fan of submarine movies, don't ask me why, if you think you're near another submarine, everybody in the submarine has to be very quiet because if you bang something or they will
Mm.
hear it because
Yes.
sound travels through water. Sound doesn't travel in a vacuum. In space, no one can hear you scream. But sound travels through water. And so you have to be very quiet when those submarines are, circling around each other and doing everything by sonar. So it's almost like the Queen of Cups with the water of water has an almost a telepathic ability to understand what the
Mm.
other person is feeling or what the other person is going through, and can relate and can definitely be the queen that could put herself in someone else's shoes. Now I have a I have another deck that I use sometimes called the Pulp Tarot, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it kind of looks like it's mid-century, like movie posters, and just has those that kind of lettering and that just that kind of vibe. And the Queen of Cups is sitting. She's wearing a kind of a pale blue Jackie O kind of suit, and she's sitting on a couch, but she's got her shoes off and her legs are kind of tucked up under her, and she's having a cup of tea. And it's almost like she's saying, come spill the tea with me, so
Uh-huh.
let's dish, but you'll tell your secrets and I'll keep mine. But it, it makes me think of the scene, and anybody who didn't watch Game of Thrones is going to be lost, but there's a scene in Game of Thrones where Diana Rigg, who was a fabulous actress and played this matriarch, not really a queen but kind of a queen, and one of the other characters, Jamie Lannister, comes and kind of tells her that her time is up and she has to take. He's brought her poison to take because and he goes. So she takes the poison, and she asks him. She says, "Is it going to be painful?" And he says no. And she says, "Good, because I would hate I would hate to die the way your son died, who she poisoned, but nobody knew that. They all thought it was somebody else." And so then she looks at him and says, Cersei, who was the boy's mother, says, "Tell Cersei it was me. I want her to know it was me." And that's what that card makes me think of. It's like the Queen of Cups can, she can do what she needs to do and get you to dish, but she'll keep her secrets until the grave.
Mm. That is very interesting. Um, I would not have thought about that. So that's really
Yeah,
interesting. I
because
like that.
I mean, kind of when you're intuitive like that, and if you are in a position of power, or
Hmm.
you can kind of, particularly where if somebody comes in and they're not on the same level as you, they're going to be a little bit intimidated. And so if you are kind of putting them at ease, that's going to kind of, like, they'll open up to you and you don't have to open up to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like manipulating in a sense,
Yeah.
let me, so that could be like a shadowy part of
Yeah.
the
And
Queen
I
of
think the
of
shadowy part of
Cups.
that
Yeah.
is that people that have this ability, they need to, are they going to use their powers for good or not? you
Yeah,
know?
and you know what? There are lots of people that use it and that use it for the not good
Right.
part of it. But that was really good. I didn't even think about that as the shadowy
Yeah, I was
part of
going through
it.
that deck and I looked at that and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it just popped in my head. Didn't doesn't look like the character at all, but sometimes this is like the energy or the mood that it evokes out of you. It just
Uh-huh.
takes you down a different way.
I like that. Very nice. All right. And then the last but not least, we have the Queen of Swords. And this one, like, I guess like you, Linda, I had a really hard time trying to understand. I have a um, very limited vocabulary in how I can describe her. Um, so like I see the Queen of Swords as a very good communicator. Somebody who can, articulate their words in a very concise way, get straight to the point, and not like I don't mean to go off on tangents because we love to go off on tangents, but they're
Me
very like
too.
straightforward. They know exactly what they want to say. They're going to say it. They know the message that they want to get across, and they're very like focused in doing so. I see them too as truth seekers. So somewhat similar to the Justice card. But I see them being like truth seekers, wanting for themselves to know the truth and wanting others to hear the truth, right? And
Yeah.
then that can be, both a very light aspect and a shadowy one, right? Because sometimes you can be very cold, right? Like you can just like you want to say something and you want to tell somebody the truth, but yet you're not like kind of thinking, "Ooh, it's really harsh, so let me do this in a gentle way," right?
Well,
Let me
it's that
take
whole thing of like, it's not mean if it's true.
Yes, and that is so that's like
Yeah.
as I say with, since I'm an early childhood teacher, I go
Yeah.
donkey duty. That's donkey duty.
That's donkey duty. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So that's how I see, and I see, the Queen of Swords as like maybe like a lawyer, or an advocate for somebody. And I look for myself like I am what they call a chapter leader in my school because New York City has one of the largest unions. It's the UFT, and I'm the representative for my school. So when I think about the Queen of Swords, I think about somebody that you need to be able to like negotiate, and you need to be able to communicate in a way that doesn't allow your emotions to overcome you. Because
Right.
you can, and let me tell you, I can be very
Oh,
like,
you.
no, 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 this isn't right. How could you do this? Da 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 da. But you have to learn to kind of separate
Yeah.
your what it is, the point you're trying to get across, separate that from the emotions. And I know that queens are kind of embody like emotions and emotional intelligence, but part of emotional intelligence is also learning to regulate your emotions and know when
Right.
they can get in the way, right? When
Right.
they can
I say
distract
that.
you.
I say that in readings for people a lot. When kings and queens come up, I'm like, this is an ability to, you feel. It's necessary that you feel your emotions. It's not about
Mhm.
repressing your emotions. And the kings and queens can feel their emotions, but yet not be overwhelmed by them.
Yes. And
So
that takes a lot of practice,
it
right? And we
does.
are talking about queens. In the suit itself, it's at the very high end, right? Like now
Yeah.
you're talking
Yeah.
about having this skill, right? This
Exactly.
experience and ability to do so. Um and then yeah, and just like I guess like the word being very objective, being
Yeah.
able to see two sides of a story or a situation, and kind of being objective and as best you can to be unbiased.
Yeah.
That would be like the
And
ultimate expression of a Queen of Swords.
yeah, I think so. The other thing I think of again, it's the water. So it's the water, air of water. And to me, that makes me think of rain. Okay, so we had
Mm,
steam, and now we have rain. And that makes me think of storms. And I think that, you know, one of my favorite cards in the deck is the Knight of Swords, because the Knight of Swords is on his horse and he's swooping in with his sword raised and he's just going to cut through the bullshit. And I think the Queen of Swords with this rainy kind of storm can be like the thunderstorm that comes and then it clears out all the confusion, and then the clouds part and we have a sunny day and we're ready to go forward. And I think and one of the things in the Benabel Win thing that I made a note about, it says every action is a choice, because I think the swords they're all about making that cut, making a choice, and just going forward with it, so that you can't just say, well, I did it. I don't know why I did it. It's like, no, every action is a choice. And it's not that somebody, oh, he said so and so I went out and shot somebody, or he made me mad. It's like, no, you chose to get mad. You
it's
chose
like it's
to
like
do that.
being accountable for the choices
Right,
that you make. Yeah.
right. And being accountable for it, because nobody forces you to do anything unless you're a child and someone physically picks you up and carries you to another place. I mean, once you get to be grown, it's like, yeah, okay, I have all this stuff in my background and all this stuff happened to me and I'm got a chip on my shoulder, but still I made the choice to do that thing that I did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like even the idea of using like tarot and all the things that we have learned and have talked about on this show, as a means to helping you make better choices,
Exactly.
right?
Oh,
Choices that, yeah,
the other thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry, is when
that's okay.
you were talking about kind of a lack of experience with the Queen of Swords and a lack of, just not having connection with it.
Hmm.
I felt the same way. And again, going back to that one deck, which was my Osho Zen deck that I've worked with for 30 years, and the Queen of Swords in that deck is, I mean, so off-putting, so just rigid and so mean looking. It's just like that's the queen that I worked with for so long, and I just could not deal with the Queen of
Hmm.
Swords again because she reminded me of my grandmother, um, just in attitude. So when I joined the symposium, which is our tarot community that we both, this is how we met, which we love. There are some exercises in there, and one of the exercises to better familiarize yourself with any particular card was to spend a week with the card. So you just work with that one card for a week. And what I did to do that was I took the Queen of Swords out of like 7 different decks. So each day there was a different Queen of Swords from a different deck. And talk about different depending on who did the deck. I mean, it was kind of amazing from the light to the dark to the middle to the happy to the sad. There were 7 different queens, even though it was the same suit, the same queen. They were so different. And after working with them, kind of moving them around, looking at them, put them, next to each other, I had such a different feeling for that card that I now feel much more confident with her and much less. I don't feel as much angst and I don't feel as much distaste when I see her pop up, and I kind of like her now. And so I would urge anybody that is having struggles with a particular card to do that. Take a week with that card, pull cards from different decks, the same card from different decks, and just look at how they are with the artist version of each one, and maybe even read the descriptions in the guidebooks for each deck, and it really will enhance your knowledge and your comfort with that card. Can't
Abs-
say that too highly.
yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like if you're talking about like little activities that you can do, you know, when I first started using tarot, people would suggest that you take a card and you find somebody that you know that might embrace some of those characters. And it works really well with the courts. And I always had like a very difficult time doing that. But I never had a difficult time doing that with the queens. And I was always able, and I find that to be very odd, and I need to reflect or think more about that as to why. But I was very much able to do that with the queens. And now that you're talking about this, I'm like, you know what? I want to do this with the kings. I want to see like who are those people in my life that, exhibit those king characteristics. And what I think I want to do is maybe use the same people that I used for the queens, use them and say, okay, so I'm here talking to everybody and telling them that the king and the queen put together make the whole. So what is it about those people that, might have those king characteristics? And I even think by doing that, I might have an even better understanding of both of them. So thank you
Yeah,
for that idea, Linda. Thank you. You just like sparked that in me.
absolutely, no problem.
Um, Wow, I think we did like a pretty good job with
I think
giving.
so.
Yeah,
I,
I really
queens
like
are
that.
the queens are definitely not one dimensional. None of them are, and they have a shadow side. They have a happy side. They can be embodied for yourself. They can be other people that might have come into your life to give you some advice or to lead you in a certain way. But, they're just cool women at the bottom line of it. And I think it's just, I think it's a good way to think of it as your own aspects of your own personal power, because
Yes.
because as I become more comfortable dealing with the court cards, and the court cards can be really tricky. They can be really
Hmm.
tricky as to how they connect to a reading or whatever. But the more I kind of internalize them as aspects of a self, the easier they are to deal with for me
Yeah,
anyway.
absolutely. And you were just mentioning, oh, there it goes, Linda. I'm going to have to edit this part out because I don't know what I was going to say. Okay, so now you had an idea before we started recording about pulling two cards and maybe just giving quick interpretations of which queen might deal with whatever
Yeah,
issue. Did you still?
I thought about just, and I don't know if we have time to do two cards, but just even
Okay,
pull
we'll
a
do
card.
just one then.
We could
Just
just
one
pull a
card.
card and
Yeah,
see how each queen would quote rule on that card.
yeah, I like that idea. Yep.
So you'll pull a card, I'll pull a card. And
Well, let's
if
just do one. Will you pull the card and we'll just talk about the one card? How
okay,
about that?
all right, I'll do that. I was gonna say, because if the stars were in alignment, we'd pull the same card.
You know what? Then I'm going to give it a try. I pulled out my queens. Did you pull out your
I pulled
queens? Uh-oh.
out my queens. Yeah, my queens are sitting here ready to make their ruling.
Okay. You just
So,
froze
and
there
you're
for
pulling
a
from
quick
the
moment.
light. Oh, sorry. And you're pulling
That's
from
all
the
right. No,
light
no, you
seers
came
deck?
back. The light
Back.
seers deck.
Okay, and I'm pulling from
Yeah.
the classic Rider Waite deck. All right, I
Yeah.
have pulled my card and not turned it over.
All right. Let me see. What card shall we talk about today? What shall the queens rule on today? Oh, temperance.
Oh,
That's so funny because I just keep thinking about what we talked about in the beginning of the episode.
King of Swords.
Oh, ooh, ooh, that's intriguing. I like that one.
Intriguing. Yeah.
All right, so why don't we do the King of Swords? So what would be something that the queens would need to rule on?
Well, that's interesting. I'm gonna try to do this. I'm gonna try to do this. All right. The Queen of Cups would rule on the King of Swords and say, get the thing out of your ass.
I was
Lighten up.
expecting you to
Lighten up,
say,
baby. What?
not what I was expecting for it to come out of your mouth.
Well, so she would just be like, lighten up, dude. Because the King of Swords is like, and I think the Queen of Wands would, what would the Queen of Wands say to the King of Swords? I think the Queen of Wands would say, don't overthink. Don't overquit.
Hmm.
At some point you got to stop thinking and then you just got to move on. I work for an attorney who would be writing on her briefs, like if the thing was due at 11:59, she was writing on that brief at 11:58, and I'll be like, you got to stop. At some point you got to stop. And I think she would be saying, okay, enough thinking, enough perseverating, enough mentation. We've got to have some action. And I think the Queen of Pentacles would say, you need to share. You need to share more.
Ooh,
You need to share more of yourself, and you need to share more with your subjects, and you need to share more. Just not be so closed off and sit behind that sword, because he's kind of sitting behind his sword in this one, sitting on the throne behind his sword. And the Queen of Swords would be saying, it's my turn.
go
It's
to
my
bed,
turn.
baby.
Go to
Go to
bed. It's
bed.
my turn.
I'm ruling
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I'm ruling. So that's kind of my quick and dirty on how the queens would rule on the kings.
I like that. I like that. Very good. Great job. So when I was thinking about temperance, obviously I was thinking about um, temperance is about balance and a lot of it too is about moderation, like doing things in moderation. So maybe if we take the queens and say, how can we, so the say the Queen of Pentacles, right? Um, so if I'm thinking about doing things in moderation, is maybe the queen would tell you if you had issues with that, maybe to just like be still, stop, think about what your choices are, think about maybe the consequences of what might happen if you choose this or if you choose this, right? Maybe working on some techniques to help you because we can get very like, oh my god, I have to do this, oh my god, I can't, you know what I mean, like you can get
Yep.
very like
Yep.
intense, and maybe you just, the queen would kind of be like, hey, you know what, come here, I have this beautiful space here, it's very relaxing, it's comfortable, let's sit down, let's take a few deep breaths, let's just try to calm ourselves so that we can make some better decisions about how to handle something. um and then I think for the Queen of Wands, um, I think the biggest message, let me see. So if you're thinking about like moderation, it would be like check yourself. Like, what are you putting too much fire into? Like, what's burning here? Like, you
Oh
think about
yeah.
fire, fire burns, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
burning here? Like, what are you like burning out about? What are you like doing too much of that you now have no energy to do anything else? Like, check yourself. Like, what's going on?
Check
You
yourself before
need
you
to
wreck yourself.
check yourself before you wreck yourself. There you go. And then I think for the Queen of Cups, it's gonna be, just more like, let's talk to me. Like, let's talk it out. Talk it out. I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna listen, and I'm not gonna judge. I'm just going to listen. If you want me to give you some advice afterwards, I will. You tell me what you want. Is this a session where you just need to like get it all out? Right? Because sometimes it can make us feel so much better when we just say it is what is going on.
Yeah, you don't have
You
to do
know,
anything. You just have
exactly.
articulated it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And then sometimes, even as you're talking about it, you come up with like ideas or solutions to your problem. So the queen is just like, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to be here. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to judge. You want my advice, I'll give it to you. If you don't want it, I'm okay with that. Whatever is going to make you feel good right now. And then I think for the Queen of Swords, it might be a little bit more of ah, like, let's think about this. Let's take our emotions out of this. Let's just do a little separation, and let's think of it in more of a logical, structured way. Like, what are the facts here? Let's just take the facts, the hard facts, let's put them out on the table, let's take a look at them, and let's think about what we need to really work on. Like, what is one
Facts,
thing that
ma'am.
we
Just
can
the
do right
facts.
now? Yeah, to kind of help you
Yeah.
deal with whatever is
But
is
that's
is
a good
going on.
idea because sometimes in situations, even like in work situations and stuff, you get caught up so much in the personality dynamics or the he said, she said, or she sent me and she sent me an email and I know she was thinking, it's like, okay, let's just say what did it say? What were the words? Forget about the tone
Yes.
that you think that it had. What were the words? What did she, what did they actually
Yes.
say factually? And take the emotion
Yes.
out of it. I think that, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So, I really like this, and I'm
But
hoping
that
that
was
we
good.
we do the same kind of model for the kings
We can.
the next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was really good. Well, thank you so much, Linda. And I'm so sorry Angie was not here today to take part in this. I
But
think she
she's
would
going to
have loved
listen to
this.
it. She's going to listen to it. She's going to love it.
That is true. She definitely will. Well, thank you to our listeners for being with us today. And we will see each other next week.
Next time. All right.
All
Y'all take
right. Have a
care.
good one.